All right, welcome back to episode 2 of our podcast about our Team Draft Fellows project. We're coming down to the wire here with 2 days left until the NFL draft. We'll have our mock draft to you tomorrow of the first round. Of course, the first round will be on Thursday, April 28th starting at 8 p.m. We will be live talking about our picks for this draft and reacting to the news. Obviously, we have some stake as football fans ourselves. I'm interested to see who the Ravens are going to take in the first round. But we're excited for that in the future. But today we're just going to kind of be talking about, our last little summary episode of what we've been doing and kind of how, last episode we talked about just what our project was and what we've been doing over the past couple months. In this project, we'll be talking about how it applies in the NFL right now in terms of talking about the new analytical wave that's going on within the NFL. So talking about the way the analytics play a role in the game and how that affects play calling and which players you're going to pick and things like that. And, some of the best analytical teams in terms of the last couple of years, and why they've made the decisions that they've made and where it's brought them.
Yeah, so we're going to be really focusing on how analytics play a role in the NFL and how it came to be that analytics kind of took over as the common theme of most NFL front offices. And that really starts with, honestly, how analytics in sports became a big deal. And that kind of started in the realm of baseball because baseball is a much easier game to record, as you can easily keep track of stats like batting average, on base, and more complicated stats like OPS, WRC plus, and different metrics that keep evaluating players. But and initially the big analytics thing that everyone thinks about when they think of baseball is Moneyball, the book, and then the movie, and how that movie went kind of viral and kind of created a wave that with the Oakland Athletics that has been seen not just in baseball with different front offices focusing on analytics, but across all different kinds of sports, and how that's trickled into football in the more recent years.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times through this project when I've been explaining it to someone in my family or a friend or something like that, they've been, they've said, oh, like Moneyball, you guys are like the guys from Moneyball.
Yeah.
And yes, kind of like that. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, as we've said in the past, that was kind of our inspiration for this project, is that there's this wave that's going on right now of explaining the game in numbers. And while most of the people that are in the front offices of NFL teams are using a whole lot more numbers than we are, we kind of wanted to have some experience with that and look at how the game can be explained through numbers. So we're going to touch on how that's looked in the NFL. In recent years, there has been, as we said, a big wave of analytics, but it's best shown through the Philadelphia Eagles. Actually, in 2018, the Super Bowl champions, they kind of had that impressive run with Nick Foles, that kind of miracle run. And really, I mean, you look at a team like that, how does a team with Nick Foles at the helm, very talented team, obviously, but how does that team win a Super Bowl over Tom Brady and people like that, knocking off some really good, the Vikings team that they knocked off, they destroyed them in Philly. So how does that team kind of do it? Well, you look at, even if you watch the game, you see that risky play calling, that special that special Philly trick play at the end of the first half there, stuff like that. All of those decisions were analytic based. That kind of risky play calling, that trust in your players is all analytic based. That Doug Peterson, the head coach, he was known as kind of the analytics guy that's going to come in and make these decisions, and they're going to be risky, but if you trust your players, it'll pay off based on the numbers. So we're going to kind of take you through that kind of season and what they used to get where they got, and what was the thought process behind a lot of that.
I think another interesting thing that we've noticed in the NFL over the last couple of years, which doesn't relate quite as much to our actual modeling with the draft, but it's definitely worth talking about, is the massive increase in how aggressive teams are being when going for it on fourth down or avoiding field goals, and realizing that there's a lot more value in going for it in a 4th and 5 if you have a potent offense and you think you can get it. because punting the ball has become definitely a more frowned upon thing in the NFL nowadays. And I feel like that's that's a result of teams looking at the analytical side of the game and how the statistics prove that if you have 4th and 2 on the 50-yard line, it's almost 100% of the time better to go for it because you have like a 60% chance of getting it. And if you punt the ball, you give up 30 yards of field position, maybe 35 on average, and you give it to the other team. Whereas if you go for it, you could get the ball at the opponent's 45, 1st and 10, great field position. You're looking good on the drive, and you have a chance of losing the ball at midfield, which isn't the end of the world because it's 35 more yards than they would have had if you punted.
Right. And you're right. I mean, even, from somebody that's never watched football, a lot of the times for these kind of things, you simplify it down to the basics. If you've never watched football, you might see a guy punt the ball away. Well, why are they just giving the ball away? You have a chance to go down and score. Like, sometimes it really is that simple. If you have the opportunity to keep the ball, you keep the ball. And that's something that we saw with Doug Peterson. He was one of the most aggressive, in Philadelphia. He's one of the most aggressive coach in NFL history. His teams would always, they would go for 2 a lot. They would go for 4th down. They would be at the top of the league in terms of attempts on 2-point conversions, 4th downs. And that, again, led to some pretty great success. But, again, there is something to be said, at the end of the day, if you want to play like that, you also have to have a good team. You have to have players that will go make those plays. I mean, you can see kind of both sides of the story here. Analytics looked really good for a while. Analytics, that's the story that prevails with this Philadelphia Super Bowl run is the analytics saying, you go for 2, you go for 4th down, things like that. That's how you win games. But then you look, what was it, week 18 this year, the Chargers versus the Raiders. Brandon Staley, the new young guy on the block, who's very analytic heavy. He loves the analytics of the game, and he makes a couple decisions, down towards the end there, and that was a crazy game in terms of the ties and things like that. But everyone's saying, well, this is kind of the analytics backfiring. He makes some decisions that ended up costing them the game because of the analytics. So there's 2 sides to the coin, but absolutely, that seemed like. In the past, I know watching a lot of Ravens games, John Harbaugh has definitely in recent years become a lot more aggressive, and that comes with, a guy like Lamar Jackson. You can be a lot more aggressive with someone like that than you can with a guy like Joe Flacco. So, it's interesting to see those kind of, the context beside it. That's what we've always said from the beginning is that we can't be perfect, in our modeling or in data in itself. You can't be perfect with just the numbers. You need the context, but absolutely, there's become a much bigger role in the NFL with that kind of usage of the numbers.
Yeah, and another interesting thing that we've been able to take advantage of with our PFF premium subscription is getting to see the individual player grades, just not only helping us with the project. It's just super interesting for us to get to. Look at all our favorite players and see how PFF thinks they've played in some of their seasons and their best seasons. And we also get to look at the same metric that many of the NFL, top NFL front offices are looking at. PFF is widely known as the best metric for maybe also you could talk about expected points. Expected points above average.
Yeah.
But PFF is probably the most widely known metric across both front offices and just across fan bases, which is really cool. Just getting to use that metric. So often, looking online, looking at articles and things like that, where people are just talking, you look, they're mentioning the PFF grades, and that's not some crazy stat that's hard to figure out. It's really just, it's how good of a player is. It's finally something that, there are flaws to it. There's flaws to every stat basically ever. But it's one of the most universal stats, talking about a player's entire game. So that has been really cool to be able to look into that. We didn't really, since we were using a lot of more historical, not necessarily far history, but, even a decade ago, these numbers were not as
widespread. And so we weren't really able to use all of the really in-depth, super detailed advanced stats because they really weren't recorded until maybe 2015, 2016, when this started to blow up. But I mean, first of all, that shows you how new this is, how new the analytics are. Because even when we're looking at draft class from 2012 to 2014, there aren't that many advanced stats on those guys because those stats just weren't used or they weren't thought about or they didn't even exist at the time. So that shows you kind of how new this whole thing is. But also, that's why it was really cool to use something like PFF because we could look at some of these guys and they're more more than just their basic counting stats that we had to use otherwise. That was really cool. And in the future, as we get more data from the 2022 class and, if we continue on to, use this model, it'll only get better the more we use it. And so that's pretty cool that we will be able to, use more advanced stats and use those newer things, as we go on in the future.
I think another big aspect that we have been able to focus on is because of analytics is the value of different plays in comparison to counting stats. Because you look at a guy, quarterback at the end of the game or end of the half at the 50-yard line, taking a snap, throws a Hail Mary, throws a pick. In counting stats, that's an interception, and that looks bad because you don't want to have interceptions. But in the advanced metrics like PFF that's looking at a play and grading it individually on how that player's playing the play, or EPA, where they're looking same type of thing individually, how the play goes down. They look deeper, and because it's a Hail Mary, it's not penalized like it would be if it was just a counting stat, because you're taking a risk and throwing it deep, but you also understand that there's a high risk that it's going to be intercepted because you're taking that risk, and it's not really the quarterback's fault if it gets picked off in the end zone.
Right. I mean, and that's what's so cool about it is that really, for the first time in so long, this is something we've been talking about our entire project is that, how do you contextualize stats? Well, for the first time, in basically ever, there are stats that have basically the context of those plays built into them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to, you don't need to just look at the stats and then watch, hours and hours of film. These stats are taking all of that film, watching it for you, and basically then doing all the analysis for you. So somebody like Campbell or I, who, we football fans, Campbell's played football, but we've never, we haven't studied data science, for the NFL or anything like that. We can then analyze how each of these players is playing in every aspect of the game without having to, watch hours of film or understand, this tiny nuances in an NFL player's game. We can just get that information through a number. So that's, that definitely has been really interesting to look at how we can, evaluate players even as someone that's not necessarily an expert on the topic.
And I know one stat that I love is total QBR, because it's a really interesting stat to look at in terms of how it contextualizes quarterback play. I know I'm not a huge Skip Bayless fan, but I know it's one of his favorite stats to bring up on the show when they're arguing about Aaron Rodgers or whatever. And you look at, it looks at quarterbacks on a 0 to 100 scale, with 50 being average, and looks at all their plays and contextualizes the plays in terms of how the throw impacted, or whatever, whether they scrambled or made a throw, impacted the play in a more deeper aspect than just 10-yard completion. It looks, was it a screen pass? Was it a deep throw across the middle? Was it a throw outside the numbers that many guys can't make? But since you got a great arm, you can make that throw. And I really love that stat, because it's another example of how you get contextualization behind the simple counting stats that you would find anywhere else in the world.
Right. I mean, even you look at, it can help, these stats can help inform so much. I was watching on a video yesterday on Jeudy, and, he is someone who hasn't really broken out yet. He has, struggled with bad quarterback play, but, he definitely has the tools. You look at his route running, and it's amazing. That's a good route runner. He should be good. It turns out he's actually the best route runner in the league. He had there's a stat. I think he had like an average of like 2.5 yards of separation every single play, which is when the second best player is like 2.1 or 1.9 or something. I mean, he's really that can help inform decisions. The Broncos, even though he hasn't broken out, they know they have a star player in the making because of those stats like that. Like, if they're just looking at counting stats, he doesn't have that many catches. He had a couple drops. He's looked all right, but without even watching any of the play, I haven't gotten the chance to watch a ton of Jerry Jeudy. I know that he might have a good season. So, if I'm in the front office of an NFL team, or even if I'm, drafting a fantasy football team, I look at that and I say, well, that's a guy that I think can really perform this year. So that's really kind of been the story of this whole project and what we're trying to portray in this episode is just that these stats, all the analytics in the NFL, people kind of make fun of them sometimes because, you have like ESPN stats, like the first player to do this in 70 degrees, whatever, the crazy stats, but they really do add, so much context to the game so that you don't have to be an expert and you don't have to watch every single player to really understand, player performance and team performance and things like that.
Yeah, the Jerry Jeudy example really hits home for me as a Broncos fan. It was miserable last year. The last couple of years, just watching Jerry Jeudy get loads of separation, play after play, running beautiful routes, and then just Drew Lock airmailing the throw. And I love Teddy Bridgewater, but the guy, he couldn't make the throws downfield to Jeudy that were necessary for Judy's skill set. But boy, am I excited to see Russ throwing to Jeudy. I think it could be a really exciting year for Denver if we have Russell Wilson throwing to Jeudy across. I think he could he's definitely a good candidate for the breakout season that JP was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of stuff, that's just what you can learn with that kind of context. A lot of the times you look at the numbers, you don't have the context that Drew Lock missed, half of the throws that he threw Jerry Judy's way, but with, you do have the context of, he's getting the separation, so there must be something else wrong, whether that's his catching or whether that's the quarterback play. But, so that's kind of just what we wanted to portray here is really the amount of context that you can get for these numbers and why they actually matter. Because, again, they get made fun of sometimes because people think they're just kind of random. And in some ways, sometimes there's a stat for everything. You can
definitely get some Tom Brady, first player to throw for 300 yards on a Sunday afternoon on January 2nd.
But they're made fun of because you can make any stat can basically fulfill any argument you want it to. You can push a lot of narratives with stats, but really they do. It's incredible to see how the NFL has shifted through media and front offices of how those numbers have began to affect the game and how even high schoolers like us can analyze the game in a deeper way. So that's kind of all we have for you today. But coming up pretty soon, like we said, we will have our mock draft. We will get into some of the stats behind, the 2022 college prospects. We're really excited. We've already started checking out. I've got a couple of players on my mind that, I'm looking for the Ravens to draft.
We got a couple players.
So we're really excited for that. And we'll kind of talk through our process in that episode. And then, of course, like I said, on Thursday, we will have our live NFL draft episode. So we're super excited for that. And, we're kind of finishing up here. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll be back soon.
Yeah, thank you.